The pregnant waitress discovered that the father of her child is a millionaire, but he didn't know about the pregnancy until they reunited at a business meeting. The clatter of plates and the hum of conversation filled the bustling diner as Olivia Mason navigated between tables, her notepad clutched tightly in her hand. At 7 months pregnant, her movements were slower than usual, but her warm smile never faltered. The regulars at Joe's diner had become like family over the years, their familiar faces a comfort as she faced the uncertainty of impending single motherhood. As she refilled a coffee mug, Olivia caught her reflection in the polished surface of the napkin dispenser. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed nights spent tossing and turning, her mind racing with worries about the future. How would she manage on her own? The father of her child was nothing more than a blurred memory from a whirlwind weekend romance, a handsome stranger passing through town who had swept her off her feet and then vanished without a trace. "Oh, you order up, Liv," Joe's gruff voice called from the kitchen, snapping her out of her reverie. Olivia hurried to the window, wincing as her swollen ankles protested. She balanced the plates on her arms with practiced ease, weaving between tables to deliver steaming stacks of pancakes and sizzling bacon to hungry patrons. "How you holdin' up, sweetheart?" Mrs. Henderson, a retired schoolteacher and one of Olivia's favorite customers, asked with concern. Olivia managed a tired smile. "One day at a time, Mrs. H. This little one's keeping me on my toes." As she turned to head back to the kitchen, the bell above the diner's door chimed. Olivia glanced up, her breath catching in her throat as she locked eyes with the man who had just walked in. Time seemed to stand still as recognition dawned on both their faces. Impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his dark hair neatly styled, he was a stark contrast to the casual diner atmosphere. But Olivia would have recognized those piercing blue eyes anywhere. It was him, the father of her unborn child. The man, whose name she now realized she had never known, looked equally shocked. His gaze dropped to her prominent belly, and Olivia saw the color drain from his face. "Olivia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Before she could respond, Joe's voice boomed from behind the counter. "Seat yourself anywhere, sir. Olivia will be right with you." Snapping back to reality, Olivia forced herself to move. She watched as the man hesitantly made his way to a booth in the corner, his eyes never leaving her. Her heart pounding, she approached his table, clutching her notepad like a shield. "Welcome to Joe's," she managed, her voice surprisingly steady. "Can I start you off with some coffee?" The man looked up at her, a mix of emotions playing across his face, confusion, disbelief, and something that looked almost like hope. "Olivia," he said again, I can't believe it's you. Do you remember me?" Olivia's knuckles turned white as she gripped her pen tighter. "Of course I remember you," she said softly. "It would be hard to forget the father of my child." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. The man's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Just then, the diner's door burst open again, and a group of suit-clad men and women entered, talking animatedly among themselves. "There you are, Alexander," one of them called out. "We've been looking all over for you. The meeting's about to start." Alexander. So that was his name. The newcomers filed into the booth, seemingly oblivious to the tension between Olivia and Alexander. As they settled in, chattering about profit margins and market shares, Olivia forced herself to slip back into professional mode. "I'll give you all a few minutes with the menus," she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "I'll be back to take your orders shortly." As she turned to leave, she felt Alexander's hand brush against hers. "Olivia, wait," he said urgently. "Please, we need to talk." She met his gaze, seeing a whirlwind of emotions that matched her own inner turmoil. "I'm working," she said quietly, "but I get off at 3. Alexander nodded, relief flooding his features. "I'll be here," he promised. As Olivia made her way back to the kitchen, her mind reeled. How was it possible that the father of her child, a man she had resigned herself to never seeing again, had just walked back into her life? And why did he seem so successful? The Alexander she had met that fateful weekend had been charming and mysterious, but he had never mentioned being wealthy or important. She leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to calm her racing heart. Through the kitchen window, she could see Alexander in animated discussion with his colleagues, gesturing emphatically as he spoke. He looked completely in his element, a far cry from the carefree, slightly roguish man she had fallen for all those months ago. "You okay, Liv?" Joe asked, his bushy eyebrows furrowed in concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Olivia managed a weak smile. "Something like that," she murmured. As she gathered herself to face the rest of her shift, Olivia's mind whirled with questions. Who was Alexander, really? What would this mean for her and her baby? And most importantly, how would she navigate the complicated emotions that were already threatening to overwhelm her? One thing was certain. Her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. As she picked up her notepad and headed back out into the diner, Olivia steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. She had been preparing to face motherhood alone, but now everything was different. The next few hours stretched on endlessly. Olivia moved through her tasks in a daze, hyper-aware of Alexander's presence in the corner booth. She could feel his eyes on her as she worked, and each time she glanced in his direction, she found him watching her intently. The business meeting seemed to drag on, with Alexander's colleagues ordering multiple rounds of coffee and engaging in heated debates over documents spread across the table. Olivia overheard snippets of conversation about mergers and acquisitions, terms that seemed so far removed from her own reality of minimum wage and tips. As the lunch rush died down, Olivia found herself with a moment to breathe. She retreated to the break room, sinking heavily onto a worn-out couch. Her hand moved instinctively to her swollen belly, feeling the reassuring movements of her baby within. "What are we going to do, little one?" she whispered, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. The future she had carefully been planning. A tiny apartment, second-hand baby clothes, long nights of just the two of them, suddenly seemed to be slipping away. Would Alexander want to be involved? Did she even want him to be? A soft knock at the door startled her. She looked up to see Maggie, the other waitress on shift, poking her head in. "Hey, Liv," Maggie said gently. "That guy in the suit's asking for you. Says it's important." Olivia nodded, taking a deep breath to compose herself. "Thanks, Maggie. I'll be right out." As she made her way back to the dining area, Olivia saw that the business meeting had finally wrapped up. Alexander's colleagues were gathering their things, shaking hands and exchanging business cards. Alexander himself stood apart from the group, his eyes fixed on Olivia as she approached. "I'm sorry to bother you while you're working," he said, his voice low and urgent. "But I couldn't wait. Olivia, I had no idea. Why didn't you try to contact me?" Olivia felt a flash of anger. "Contact you how, Alexander? I didn't even know your last name. You breezed into town for a weekend and then disappeared. What was I supposed to do? Put up missing person posters?" Alexander had the grace to look ashamed. "You're right. I'm sorry. I wasn't in a good place back then. I was running from my responsibilities, trying to escape my life for a while. Meeting you was the best thing that happened to me in a long time, but I convinced myself it was better to leave before things got complicated." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that Olivia remembered all too well. "I never imagined. God, Olivia, if I had known, I would have come back in a heartbeat." Olivia felt her resolve weakening at the sincerity in his voice, but she steeled herself. "Well, now you know," she said quietly. "The question is, what happens next?" Alexander opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by one of his colleagues calling his name. "Prescott, car's here. We need to get moving if we're going to make the flight back to New York." Prescott. Alexander Prescott. The name tickled something in Olivia's memory, but she couldn't quite place it. Alexander turned back to Olivia, conflict clear on his face. "I have to go," he said, the words seemingly painful for him to utter. "But this isn't over, Olivia. Please, let me give you my number. I want to be there for you and the baby. I want to make this right." Olivia hesitated for a moment before nodding. She watched as Alexander scribbled his number on a napkin, his hands trembling slightly. I'll call you tonight, he promised, pressing the napkin into her hand. Oh, we have so much to talk about. And then he was gone, swept out of the diner with his entourage, leaving Olivia standing alone, clutching a napkin with the power to change everything. As the door swung shut behind Alexander, the diner seemed unnaturally quiet. Olivia became aware of the curious stares of the remaining patrons, and she quickly busied herself wiping down tables. Her mind raced as she worked. Alexander Prescott. Why did that name sound so familiar? She made a mental note to look it up as soon as she got home. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. When 3 o'clock finally rolled around, Olivia hung up her apron with a sigh of relief. As she gathered her things, Joe appeared from the kitchen, concern etched on his weathered face. "Everything all right, kid?" he asked gruffly. "You've been off all day." Olivia managed a small smile. "It's been an interesting day, Joe, but I'm okay. Really?" Joe nodded, clearly not entirely convinced. "You know you can always talk to me if you need to, right? Your family here, Liv." Touched by his concern, Olivia impulsively gave the older man a hug. "I know, Joe. Thank you." As she left the diner, stepping out into the warm afternoon sun, Olivia felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice. The life she had carefully been constructing for herself and her baby suddenly felt fragile, like a house of cards ready to topple at the slightest breeze. But as she placed a protective hand on her belly, feeling the strong kicks of the life growing within her, Olivia found her resolve strengthening. Whatever came next, whatever Alexander Prescott's reappearance in her life might mean, she would face it head-on, for herself and for her child. With a deep breath, Olivia began the walk home, the napkin with Alexander's number burning a hole in her pocket. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. Olivia's small apartment felt even more cramped than usual as she paced back and forth, the napkin with Alexander's number clutched tightly in her hand. The events of the day replayed in her mind like a surreal movie, each scene more unbelievable than the last. With a deep breath, she sank onto her worn sofa and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the keypad as she debated whether to make the call or wait for Alexander to contact her as he'd promised. Curiosity won out, and she found herself typing his name into a search engine. The results made her gasp. Alexander Prescott, CEO of Prescott Industries, one of the largest technology companies in the country. His face stared back at her from countless articles and interviews, looking polished and professional, a far cry from the carefree man she'd met all those months ago. "Oh, baby," Olivia whispered, her hand moving to her swollen belly. "What have we gotten ourselves into?" As if in response, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number. Olivia's heart raced as she answered. "Olivia?" Alexander's voice came through, a mix of relief and nervousness. "I'm glad you picked up. I wasn't sure you would." Olivia took a steadying breath. "I wasn't sure I would either," she admitted, "but I think we have a lot to talk about." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "We do," Alexander agreed. "Olivia, I can't even begin to express how sorry I am. I never meant to disappear on you like that. And if I had known about the baby—" "But you didn't know," Olivia interrupted, surprising herself with the calm in her voice. "And I didn't know how to reach you. So here we are." Another pause. "Here we are," Alexander echoed softly. "Olivia, I want you to know that I'm ready to take responsibility. Whatever you need, financial support, medical care, anything, it's yours. No questions asked." Olivia felt a flicker of anger. "I'm not looking for a handout, Alexander. I've been managing on my own just fine. I didn't mean to imply— God, I'm making a mess of this, aren't I?" Alexander's frustration was palpable. "Look, can we meet? In person? There's so much I want to say, to explain. Please, Olivia, give me a chance to make this right." Olivia closed her eyes, weighing her options. Part of her wanted to shut Alexander out completely, to protect herself and her baby from the complications his presence would surely bring. But another part, the part that remembered the connection they'd shared, however brief, longed to understand. "Okay, she said finally. "We can meet, but not here. I don't want my neighbors gossiping." "Of course," Alexander agreed quickly. "There's a small park near the diner. Would that work? Say, tomorrow afternoon." They agreed on a time, and Olivia ended the call feeling both relieved and apprehensive. As she prepared a simple dinner, her mind wandered to the future. How would Alexander fit into their lives? Did she even want him to? The next day dawned bright and clear. Olivia dressed carefully, choosing a flowing sundress that complemented her pregnant figure. As she made her way to the park, she spotted Alexander already waiting on a bench, looking slightly out of place in his expensive suit. He stood as she approached, his eyes taking in her appearance with a mix of awe and regret. "Olivia," he breathed, "you look, God, you're beautiful." Olivia felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "Let's sit," she said, lowering herself onto the bench. "I can't stand for too long these days." Alexander nodded, sitting beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching children play on the nearby swings. "I owe you an explanation," Alexander began, "about who I am and why I left the way I did." Olivia turned to face him, noting the lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I'm listening," she said softly. Alexander took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I was at a crossroads. My father had just stepped down as CEO of our family company, and suddenly, I was thrust into a role I wasn't sure I was ready for. The pressure was immense. Everyone was watching, waiting to see if I'd fail. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Olivia remembered from their brief time together. I panicked. I told my assistant I was taking a week off for a spiritual retreat, and I just ran. I ended up in this little town, determined to be someone else for a while. Olivia nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. And that's when we met. "Yes," Alexander said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I walked into that diner, saw you, and suddenly nothing else mattered. Those 3 days we spent together, Olivia, they were the most real, the most alive I'd felt in years." The sincerity in his voice made Olivia's heart ache. "Then why did you leave?" she asked, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. Alexander's face fell. "Because I'm a coward," he admitted. "I convinced myself that it was better to leave with the perfect memory than to try for something real and risk ruining it. And I had responsibilities waiting for me. A company to run, a legacy to uphold." He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense. "But I never forgot you, Olivia. I thought about you every day. I even came back to the diner a month later, hoping to see you, but you weren't there." Olivia remembered that day. She'd called in sick, battling the first waves of morning sickness. The irony of it made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. "And now?" she asked, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "What happens now, Alexander?" He reached out, hesitating for a moment before gently placing his hand over hers. "Now, I want to be here. For you, for our child, if you'll let me." The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through Olivia. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, but found only earnest determination. "It won't be easy," she warned. "My life is here. I have a job, friends, a community. I can't just uproot everything." Alexander nodded. "I understand, and I wouldn't ask you to. But maybe we can find a way to make this work. Together." As they sat there, the afternoon sun warming their faces, Olivia felt a flutter of hope. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, the possibility of a future she'd never dared to imagine. "I can't promise anything," she said slowly, "but I'm willing to try." The smile that lit up Alexander's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He squeezed her hand gently. "That's all I ask," he said softly. As they began to talk, really talk, about their lives, their hopes, and their fears for the future, Olivia felt something shift within her. The wall she'd built around her heart began to crumble, just a little. They spent hours in the park, sharing stories and getting to know each other in a way they never had during their whirlwind romance. Alexander spoke of the pressures of running a Fortune 500 company, the weight of his family's expectations. Olivia shared her dreams of going back to school, of providing a stable life for her child. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass, Alexander helped Olivia to her feet. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Olivia nodded, surprised to find herself looking forward to it. "I'd like that," she said softly. As they parted ways, Olivia felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. Fear, hope, excitement, uncertainty, all blending together into a cocktail of possibility. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't facing it alone. That night, as she lay in bed, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, Olivia allowed herself to dream. Not of fairy tale endings or instant happily ever afters, but of something real. Something built on honesty, understanding, and the kind of love that grows slowly, rooted in shared experiences and mutual respect. "We'll figure this out, little one," she whispered to her unborn child, "one day at a time." As she drifted off to sleep, Olivia's last thought was of Alexander's smile. Not the polished grin of a CEO, but the genuine, hopeful smile of a man ready to embrace a future he never expected. A future that, against all odds, now included her and their child. The journey ahead would be challenging, full of ups and downs, misunderstandings and compromises. But as Olivia closed her eyes, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it, not alone, but with the unexpected support of the man who had walked back into her life at precisely the right moment. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, Olivia found herself looking forward to it with hope in her heart and a smile on her face. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments for Olivia and Alexander. True to his word, Alexander made time to see Olivia every day, whether it was for a quick lunch at the diner or a leisurely walk in the park. With each meeting, the initial awkwardness between them began to fade, replaced by a tentative warmth and understanding. One sunny afternoon, as Olivia's shift at the diner was ending, she emerged from the staff room to find Alexander waiting for her, a nervous smile on his face. "I thought we could try something different today," he said, offering her his arm. "If you're up for it, that is." Intrigued, Olivia nodded, allowing him to guide her to a sleek black car parked outside. As they drove through town, leaving the familiar streets behind, Olivia felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Where are we going?" she asked, watching as the landscape changed from urban to rural. Alexander's smile widened. "It's a surprise, but I think you'll like it." After about an hour's drive, they pulled up to a beautiful lakeside property, a modern cabin nestled among towering pines, its large windows reflecting the sparkling water. "Welcome to my retreat," Alexander said softly as he helped Olivia out of the car. "This is where I come when I need to escape the pressures of the city and just breathe." Olivia took in the peaceful surroundings, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. "It's beautiful," she murmured. As they settled onto the cabin's spacious deck, a panoramic view of the lake before them, Alexander turned to Olivia with a serious expression. "I brought you here because I wanted to show you a part of my life," he began, "but also because I have something important to ask you." Olivia felt her heart rate quicken. "Oh," Alexander took a deep breath. "Olivia, I know we're still getting to know each other again, and I don't want to rush things. But the reality is, our baby will be here in just a couple of months. I want to be there for every moment, to be a real father." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "What would you think about moving to New York? I have a penthouse with plenty of space and the best medical care in the country. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. You could focus on the baby. Maybe even start those college classes you've been dreaming about." Olivia felt as if the air had been sucked out of her lungs. She stared at Alexander, trying to process his words. The offer was generous, even overwhelming in its scope. But "Alexander," she said slowly, "I appreciate what you're offering. I really do. But my whole life is here. My job, my friends, the community I've built. I can't just leave all that behind." She saw the disappointment flicker across his face and quickly continued. "That doesn't mean I don't want you involved. We can figure out a way to make this work, with you in New York and us here. There are planes, video calls." Alexander nodded, but Olivia could see the conflict in his eyes. "I understand," he said softly. I don't want to miss anything. I've already missed so much." The pain in his voice tugged at Olivia's heart. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "We'll figure it out," she promised. "One step at a time, remember?" They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking, about their fears and hopes for the future. As the sun began to set, painting the lake in hues of gold and pink, Olivia felt a deeper connection forming between them. On the drive back to town, a comfortable silence settled over them. Olivia found herself stealing glances at Alexander, noticing the way the fading light softened his features, making him look more like the carefree man she'd first fallen for. As they pulled up in front of her apartment building, Alexander turned to her with a soft smile. "Thank you for today," he said. "For being honest with me, even when it's not what I want to hear." Olivia felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "Thank you for listening," she replied, "and for trying to understand." She leaned in, intending to give him a friendly peck on the cheek, but at the last moment, Alexander turned his head. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft and sweet, filled with promise and possibility. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Olivia saw her own mix of emotions reflected in Alexander's eyes. "Good night, Olivia," he murmured. "Good night, Alexander," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As she made her way up to her apartment, Olivia's mind was spinning. The kiss had awakened feelings she'd been trying to keep at bay, reminding her of the connection they'd shared all those months ago. But with those feelings came a new set of complications. The next morning, Olivia arrived at the diner for her shift, her thoughts still jumbled from the events of the previous day. As she tied on her apron, Maggie, her co-worker and closest friend, eyed her suspiciously. "All right, spill," Maggie demanded as they worked side by side at the counter. "You've got that glow about you. What's going on with Mr. Tall, dark, and loaded?" Olivia sighed, knowing she couldn't keep her friend in the dark any longer. Over the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the coffee machine, she filled Maggie in on the developments of the past few weeks. Maggie listened with wide eyes, letting out a low whistle when Olivia finished. "Girl, your life has turned into a real-life romance novel," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "But are you sure you can trust him? Men like that? They're used to getting what they want." Olivia frowned, feeling a need to defend Alexander. "He's not like that, Mags. He's complicated, sure, but he's trying. He really wants to be there for the baby." "And for you?" Maggie pressed. "Because, honey, I've seen the way he looks at you. That man is falling hard." Before Olivia could respond, the diner's door swung open and a group of men in expensive suits walked in. Olivia's heart skipped a beat as she recognized Alexander among them, looking every inch the powerful CEO in his tailored jacket and crisp white shirt. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, the busy diner faded away. Alexander's professional mask slipped, replaced by a warm smile that made Olivia's knees weak. "Well, speak of the devil," Maggie muttered. "It looks like your two worlds are about to collide." As Alexander and his associates settled into a booth, Olivia took a deep breath, smoothing down her uniform. She approached the table, notepad in hand, trying to project an air of professional calm. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "What can I get for you today?" Alexander's colleagues placed their orders, barely glancing up from their phones and tablets. But Alexander's eyes never left Olivia's face. "Just coffee for me, please," he said softly. Then, in a lower voice meant only for her ears, he added, "You look beautiful this morning." Olivia felt a blush creep up her neck. "Thank you," she murmured, turning quickly to hide her flustered expression. As she prepared their order, Olivia could feel the curious stares of the other patrons, It wasn't every day that a group of high-powered executives dined at Joe's, and the contrast between Alexander's world and hers had never been more apparent. Throughout the meal, Olivia found herself hyper-aware of Alexander's presence. She caught snippets of their conversation, talks of mergers and acquisitions, numbers that made her head spin. It was a stark reminder of just how different their lives were. As the executives prepared to leave, Alexander lingered behind. He approached the counter where Olivia was wiping down menus, his expression conflicted. "I'm sorry to ambush you at work," he said quietly. "We had a last-minute meeting in town, and I couldn't resist the chance to see you." Olivia managed a small smile. "It's okay. It's just a bit overwhelming, seeing you in full CEO mode." Alexander's face fell slightly. "Does it bother you?" "My job, I mean." Olivia considered her words carefully. "It's not that it bothers me," she said slowly. It's so far removed from my world. Sometimes I wonder if we can really make this work." Alexander reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "We can," he said firmly. "If we both want it, we can figure it out. I'm not asking you to fit into my world, Olivia. I want to be part of yours, too." The sincerity in his voice made Olivia's heart swell. She squeezed his hand, feeling a renewed sense of hope. Okay," she said softly. "Then let's keep figuring it out. Together." As Alexander left to join his waiting colleagues, Olivia felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. Fear, excitement, uncertainty, and a growing affection for the complex man who had re-entered her life so unexpectedly. That evening, as she sat on her small balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues, Olivia placed a hand on her swollen belly. She felt the baby kick, as if responding to her touch. "Well, little one," she murmured, "looks like our lives are going to be more interesting than I thought. But don't worry. No matter what happens with your dad and me, you'll always come first." As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Olivia allowed herself to dream of possibilities. A future where she could balance her own aspirations with motherhood, where Alexander could be a part of their lives without overshadowing them. It wouldn't be easy, but as she'd told him, they would figure it out, one day at a time. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Thinking of you both. Sweet dreams." Olivia smiled, typing back a simple reply. "You too. See you tomorrow." As she drifted off to sleep that night, Olivia felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead might be uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited to see where it might lead. As summer faded into autumn, Olivia found herself navigating a new normal. Her days were a delicate balance of work at the diner, doctor's appointments, and stolen moments with Alexander. Despite the growing complexity of their situation, she couldn't deny the warmth that filled her heart whenever he was near. One crisp October morning, Olivia woke to the sound of her phone buzzing insistently. Bleary-eyed, she reached for it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Alexander's name on the screen. "Olivia." His voice was tight with tension. "I need to ask you something important. Can you meet me at the park in an hour?" Concern flooded through her. "Of course. Is everything okay?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm not sure. I'll explain when I see you." An hour later, Olivia found Alexander pacing near their usual bench, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. When he saw her, relief washed over his face. "Thank you for coming," he said, guiding her to sit down. "I'm sorry for the early call, but something's happened." Olivia's hand instinctively went to her belly, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Alexander. He quickly shook his head. No, it's nothing to do with the baby," he assured her. Well, the press has gotten wind of our situation." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. "What? How?" Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of his distress. "I'm not sure. But there's a story breaking in the business section of the New York Times. Prescott Ayres' secret love child, or some sensationalist nonsense like that. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Olivia processed his words. She had known on some level that their situation couldn't remain private forever, but the reality of it hit her like a physical blow. What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander took her hands in his blue eyes filled with determination. "It means we need to get ahead of this story. I have a team of PR professionals ready to help, but Olivia, I need to know what you want, how much you're comfortable sharing with the world." Olivia's mind raced. She thought of her quiet life in this small town, her friends at the diner, the peaceful anonymity she had always taken for granted. All of that was about to change. I don't know," she admitted, feeling overwhelmed. "I never wanted to be in the spotlight, Alexander. I'm just me, a small-town waitress who's about to be a mom. I'm not cut out for all this." Alexander's expression softened. He gently cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You are so much more than that, Olivia. You're strong, kind, and absolutely amazing. And I love you." The words hung in the air between them, both a balm and a complication. Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Alexander, He shook his head, cutting her off gently. "You don't have to say anything. I know this is all happening so fast, but I need you to know how I feel, especially now. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together, if you'll let me." Olivia took a deep breath, trying to center herself. She thought of the baby growing inside her, the future she wanted to provide, and she thought of Alexander, complicated, frustrating, wonderful Alexander, who had become such an integral part of that future. "Okay," she said finally. "What do we need to do?" Relief flooded Alexander's face. He pulled out his phone, quickly tapping out a message. "I'm going to have my team set up a press conference for this afternoon. We'll make a statement, control the narrative. But Olivia, you don't have to be there if you don't want to be. I can handle this on my own." Olivia considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I should be there. We're in this together, right?" Alexander's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Together," he agreed, squeezing her hand. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Alexander's PR team descended on Olivia's small apartment, bringing with them a whirlwind of designer clothes, makeup artists, and media coaches. As she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the polished woman staring back at her, Olivia felt a pang of nostalgia for her comfortable waitress uniform. "You look beautiful," a voice said from the doorway. Olivia turned to see Maggie, who had insisted on coming over for moral support. "I look like someone else," Olivia said softly. Maggie crossed the room, taking Olivia's hands in hers. "You look like you," she insisted. "Just a fancier version, but it's still you in there, Liv. Don't forget that." Olivia nodded, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. "What would I do without you, Mags? Crash and burn, probably," Maggie teased, lightening the mood. Then, more seriously, "Are you sure about this, Liv? Once you step in front of those cameras, there's no going back." Olivia placed a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the reassuring movement of her baby. "I'm sure," she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about our family." The word family sent a thrill through her. It was the first time she had really thought of herself, the baby, and Alexander in those terms. But it felt right. As they made their way to the hotel where the press conference was to be held, Olivia felt her nerves mounting. Alexander, sensing her anxiety, reached over to take her hand. "Remember," he said softly, "you don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Just stand beside me. That's enough." Olivia nodded, drawing strength from his presence. As they stepped out of the car, a barrage of camera flashes nearly blinded her. Alexander's arm went around her protectively, guiding her through the crowd of reporters shouting questions. Inside, they were ushered to a small room to wait. Alexander paced nervously while Olivia sat, one hand on her belly, trying to calm her racing heart. "Mr. Prescott, Miss Mason, we're ready for you," a young woman with a clipboard announced. As they walked towards the conference room, Olivia felt a sudden wave of dizziness. She stumbled slightly, and Alexander was there in an instant, supporting her. "Olivia, are you okay?" The concern in his voice was palpable. She nodded, taking deep breaths. "Just nervous," she managed. Alexander's face set in a determined expression. He turned to the clipboard woman. "We need a few more minutes." Before Olivia could protest, he had guided her to a nearby chair, kneeling in front of her. "Listen to me," he said softly. "We don't have to do this. Not if it's too much. You and the baby are what matter most. The press, the company, all of it, it's nothing compared to you." Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the sincerity in his voice. In that moment, she saw not the powerful CEO or the charming man who had swept her off her feet, but simply Alexander, the father of her child, the man who had become her partner in this unexpected journey. She reached out, cupping his face in her hands. "I love you too," she whispered, the words she hadn't been able to say earlier finally finding their way out. Alexander's eyes widened, a smile breaking across his face. He leaned in, kissing her softly, tenderly. When they parted, Olivia felt a new sense of calm settle over her. "Okay," she said, standing up straighter. "Let's do this." Hand in hand, they walked into the conference room. The explosion of camera flashes and shouted questions was overwhelming, but Olivia focused on the warmth of Alexander's hand in hers, the solid presence of him beside her. Alexander stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for coming. I know there have been many rumors and speculation, so I want to set the record straight." He paused, looking at Olivia with a soft smile before turning back to the press. "Yes, I am going to be a father. And yes, the mother of my child is Olivia Mason, the remarkable woman standing beside me. Our story may not be conventional, but it is ours. We are committed to each other and to our child. We ask for privacy and respect as we navigate this new chapter in our lives." As the questions began flying, Olivia felt a surge of pride and love for Alexander. He fielded each query with grace and honesty, neither hiding their unconventional situation nor apologizing for it. When a reporter asked Olivia directly about her feelings, she surprised herself by stepping forward to the microphone. "I never expected my life to take this turn," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But I am grateful for the joy this baby has brought into my life, and for the chance to know Alexander. We're taking things one day at a time, learning and growing together." As they left the conference and exhausted but relieved, Alexander pulled Olivia close. "You were amazing," he murmured into her hair. Olivia leaned into him, feeling a sense of peace despite the chaos around them. "We were amazing," she corrected. That night, as they sat on Olivia's small balcony, watching the stars come out, Alexander turned to her with a serious expression. "Move in with me," he said softly. Olivia blinked, surprised. "What?" "Not to New York," he clarified quickly. I've been thinking. My company has been looking to expand, open a new office. There's no reason it can't be here. I want to be where you are, Olivia, where our family is." Overwhelmed by emotion, Olivia could only nod, tears spilling down her cheeks. Alexander gathered her in his arms, holding her close. As the autumn breeze rustled the leaves around them, Olivia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, adjustments, and undoubtedly more scrutiny. But as she sat there, wrapped in Alexander's embrace, their baby moving between them, she knew that together they could face anything. The future, once so uncertain, now shimmered with possibility, and Olivia was ready to embrace it, one day at a time. The weeks following the press conference were a whirlwind of change for Olivia and Alexander. True to his word, Alexander had begun the process of opening a new branch of Prescott Industries in their small town. He'd found a charming house on the outskirts of the city, with plenty of room for their growing family and a view of the mountains that took Olivia's breath away. As Olivia stood in what would soon be the nursery, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The room was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Alexander's voice came from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him in those early days at the diner. Olivia turned to him with a small smile. "Just thinking about how much has changed. A few months ago, I was worried about making rent on my tiny apartment, and now—" Alexander crossed the room, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting gently on her swollen belly. "Having second thoughts?" he asked softly, a hint of worry in his voice. Olivia leaned back into his embrace, shaking her head. "No, not second thoughts. Just adjusting. It's a lot to take in." Alexander pressed a kiss to her temple. "I know, and I'm so grateful for how you've handled everything. You're amazing, Olivia." As if in agreement, the baby chose that moment to deliver a sharp kick. They both laughed, the tension of the moment broken. "I think someone's ready for dinner," Olivia said, patting her stomach. Alexander grinned, taking her hand. "Then dinner you shall have. What does the mother of my child desire?" Olivia pretended to think hard. How about that little Italian place in town? I've been craving their garlic bread." "Your wish is my command," Alexander said with a theatrical bow, making Olivia giggle. As they drove into town, Olivia couldn't help but notice the curious glances from passers-by. News of their relationship and impending parenthood had spread quickly in the small community. While most people had been supportive, she still felt the weight of their scrutiny. At the restaurant, they were seated at a cozy corner table. As they perused the menus, Olivia noticed Alexander's brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" she asked, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Alexander sighed, setting down his menu. "I got a call from the board today. They're concerned about the new office here. They think it's not a sound business decision." Olivia felt her heart sink. "Oh, I see." Seeing her expression, Alexander quickly continued, "But I told them it's non-negotiable. This is where we're building our life, where our child will grow up. The company will adapt." Warmth bloomed in Olivia's chest at his words, but a nagging doubt remained. "Are you sure, Alexander? I don't want you to risk everything you've built for us." Alexander's blue eyes met hers, filled with determination. "You and this baby are everything to me, Olivia. The company is important, yes, but it's not everything. I spent too many years thinking it was, and look where that got me. Lonely, stressed, running away to small-town diners just to feel human again." He reached across the table, taking both of her hands in his. "Meeting you, loving you. It's shown me what really matters. I won't let anyone or anything jeopardize that." Olivia felt tears prick at her eyes, blaming it on the hormones even as her heart swelled with love for this complicated, wonderful man. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of their waiter, a young man named Tommy, who Olivia recognized from her days at the diner. "Evening, folks," Tommy said with a friendly smile. What can I get you tonight?" As they placed their orders, Olivia noticed Tommy's eyes widening as he realized who they were. To his credit, he maintained his professionalism, only allowing a slight tremor in his voice to betray his surprise. After he left, Alexander chuckled softly. "I don't think I'll ever get used to that look of recognition." Olivia smiled ruefully. "Welcome to small-town life. Everyone knows everyone else's business." "Is it hard for you?" Alexander asked, his expression serious. "All the attention, the gossip?" Olivia considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss the anonymity sometimes. But then I think about our baby, about the life we're building, and it all seems worth it." Alexander's face softened. "You're incredible, you know that. I don't think I tell you often enough." As they enjoyed their meal, talking and laughing, Olivia felt a sense of normalcy settle over them. This was what she had always wanted, a partner to share her life with, a family to love. The circumstances might be unconventional, but the feelings were real. After dinner, They took a leisurely stroll through the town square. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, and holiday decorations were already starting to appear in shop windows. As they walked, hand in hand, Olivia noticed more than a few curious glances and whispered conversations. "Maybe we should head back," she said softly, feeling suddenly exposed. Alexander squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Hey," he said, stopping and turning to face her. "Are you okay?" Olivia bit her lip, struggling to put her feelings into words. I feel like I'm living in a fishbowl sometimes, like everyone's watching, waiting for us to fail." Understanding dawned in Alexander's eyes. Without warning, he pulled her close and kissed her deeply, right there in the middle of the town square. When they parted, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Let them watch," he said softly. "All they'll see is how much I love you." Olivia felt a warmth spread through her, chasing away the chill of doubt. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Take me home," she asked. "With pleasure," Alexander replied, wrapping an arm around her waist as they made their way back to the car. That night, as they lay in bed, Olivia found herself unable to sleep. She slipped out from under Alexander's arm, padding quietly to the nursery. The room was bathed in moonlight, casting an ethereal glow over the half-assembled crib and stacks of baby books. As she stood there, one hand resting on her belly, Olivia felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. This was her life now, not perfect, not without its challenges, but filled with love and possibility. She felt Alexander's presence before she heard him, a warmth at her back as he enveloped her in his arms. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured, his voice husky with sleep. Olivia leaned back into him, shaking her head. "Just thinking." "Good thoughts, I hope." She turned in his arms, looking up into his face. In the moonlight, with his hair tousled from sleep and his eyes soft with love, he looked more like the carefree man she'd first fallen for than the polished CEO the world knew. "The best," she assured him. "But I was thinking about how lucky this baby is to be so loved already. How lucky I am." Alexander's smile was tender as he placed a hand on her belly. "We're the lucky ones," he corrected gently. As they stood there in the moonlit nursery, wrapped in each other's arms with their unborn child between them, Olivia felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, where they belonged. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Alexander threw himself into preparations for the new office, determined to make it a success despite the board's reservations. Olivia, now on maternity leave from the diner, focused on getting the house ready for the baby's arrival. One crisp December morning, as Olivia was putting the finishing touches on the nursery, she felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. She breathed through it, dismissing it as Braxton Hicks contractions. But when another and stronger pain hit a few minutes later, she knew. It was time. "Alexander!" she called out, her voice tight with a mix of excitement and fear. There was a crash from downstairs, followed by the sound of running feet. Alexander appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath, his eyes wide. "Is it?" he asked, unable to finish the sentence. Olivia nodded, a small smile playing on her lips despite the pain. "I think our little one is ready to meet us." What followed was a whirlwind of activity, the drive to the hospital, the hours of labor, Alexander's steady presence by her side, murmuring words of encouragement and love. And then, in the early hours of the morning, their daughter was born. As Olivia held her for the first time, marveling at the tiny fingers and rosebud mouth, she felt a love so profound it took her breath away. Alexander, tears streaming down his face, leaned in to kiss Olivia's forehead. "She's perfect," he whispered. "You're perfect. I love you both so much." As the first light of dawn broke through the hospital window, Olivia looked at her little family, Alexander, gazing adoringly at their daughter and the tiny bundle in her arms, and knew that every challenge, every moment of doubt, had led to this perfect, beautiful moment. "Welcome to the world, Sophia Grace Prescott," Olivia murmured, her voice filled with love and promise. Your journey is just beginning. The soft glow of the nightlight cast gentle shadows across the nursery as Olivia gently rocked Sophia in the plush armchair. It was 3 a.m., and the house was quiet save for the baby's soft whimpers and Olivia's hushed lullaby. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word," she sang softly, her voice thick with exhaustion. As Sophia's eyes finally fluttered closed, Olivia let out a sigh of relief. She carefully stood, wincing at the protest of her still recovering body, and placed the sleeping infant in her crib. "Sweet dreams, little one," she whispered, brushing a feather-light kiss on Sophia's forehead. As she turned to leave the nursery, she nearly collided with Alexander, who was standing in the doorway with 2 steaming mugs. "I thought you might need this," he said softly, offering her a mug of herbal tea. Olivia accepted it gratefully, inhaling the soothing aroma of chamomile. "You're a lifesaver," she murmured, leaning into him as they made their way to the living room. They settled onto the couch, Olivia curling into Alexander's side. For a few moments, they sat in comfortable silence, sipping their tea and listening to the soft sounds of their daughter's breathing through the baby monitor. "I never knew I could love someone so much," Alexander said quietly, his voice filled with wonder, "or be so terrified all the time." Olivia chuckled softly. "Welcome to parenthood. It's a roller coaster of emotions." Alexander set down his mug and turned to face her, his expression serious. "How are you really doing, Liv? And don't say fine. I know these past few weeks have been tough." Olivia sighed, considering her words carefully. "It's overwhelming," she admitted. "Beautiful and terrifying and exhausting all at once. Some days I feel like I'm drowning, like I have no idea what I'm doing. And then Sophia smiles, or grabs my finger, and suddenly it all feels worth it." Alexander pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're amazing, you know that. I see how natural you are with her, how patient and loving. I feel like I'm fumbling half the time." "Oh, Alex," Olivia said, using the nickname she'd only recently started calling him. "You're doing great. Sophia lights up when she hears your voice, and I couldn't do this without you." As if on cue, a cry erupted from the baby monitor. They both groaned, sharing a rueful smile. "I've got this one," Alexander said, standing up. "You try to get some rest." Olivia watched him go, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. Despite the challenges of new parenthood, Alexander had been her rock, juggling his work responsibilities with late-night feedings and diaper changes without complaint. As she settled back into the couch, pulling a soft throw over herself, Olivia's mind wandered to the whirlwind of the past few weeks. Bringing Sophia home from the hospital had been both joyous and terrifying. The first night, they had both barely slept, checking on her every few minutes to make sure she was still breathing. Then there had been the parade of visitors, Alexander's parents flying in from New York, looking polished and slightly out of place in their small-town setting, Maggie and the diner crew, bringing home-cooked meals and cheerful support. Even a few of Alexander's business associates, their awkwardness around the baby both amusing and endearing. Through it all, Olivia had been acutely aware of the scrutiny they were under. The local paper had run a front-page story on Sophia's birth, complete with speculation about whether the Prescott heir would be raised in their small town or whisk her away to New York. Paparazzi had camped out near their house for days, hoping for a glimpse of the new family. Alexander had handled it all with grace, fiercely protecting their privacy, while also acknowledging the public's interest in their story. He'd given one carefully worded interview to a national magazine, speaking about his joy in fatherhood and his commitment to balancing his family life with his business responsibilities. Olivia was pulled from her thoughts by Alexander's return, Sophia cradled against his chest. "Someone's not quite ready to go back to sleep," he said softly, a mixture of exhaustion and adoration in his voice. "I think she wants her mom." As Olivia took Sophia into her arms, she felt that now familiar rush of love. Despite the sleepless nights and the challenges, she wouldn't trade this for anything in the world. "Hey there, sweet girl," she cooed, smiling as Sophia's tiny hand wrapped around her finger. "What's got you so wakeful, Alexander sat beside them, his arm draped around Olivia's shoulders. "I was thinking," he said hesitantly, "maybe it's time we considered getting some help. A night nurse, perhaps, just to give us a chance to catch up on sleep." Olivia tensed slightly. It was a conversation they'd had before, one that always left her feeling conflicted. "I don't know, Alex. It feels like we should be able to handle this ourselves." Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know you want to do it all, Liv, and you're amazing at it. But there's no shame in accepting help. We both need to be at our best for Sophia." As Olivia opened her mouth to argue, Sophia let out a soft coo, her eyes fixed on her father's face. The love and wonder in Alexander's expression as he gazed at their daughter made Olivia's heart melt. "Okay," she said softly. "Maybe you're right. We can try it, see how it goes." Alexander's smile was radiant as he leaned in to kiss her gently. "Thank you," he murmured against her lips. The next few days were a blur of interviews and background checks as they searched for the perfect night nurse. Eventually, they settled on a kind, experienced woman named Marie, whose calm demeanor put them both at ease. The first night with Marie's help was strange. Olivia found herself waking at every little sound, fighting the urge to rush to the nursery. But when morning came and she realized she'd slept for a solid 5 hours, she had to admit it made a world of difference. As weeks turned into months, they settled into a new rhythm. Alexander threw himself into getting the new office up and running, often working late into the night after spending the early evening with Olivia and Sophia. Olivia found herself slowly regaining her energy, even starting to think about her own future plans. One sunny afternoon, as they sat in the backyard watching Sophia nap in her portable bassinet, Olivia turned to Alexander with a determined look in her eye. "I think I want to go back to school," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Not right away, but soon. Maybe online classes at first, then part-time when Sophia's a bit older." Alexander's face lit up. "Liv, that's wonderful. What are you thinking of studying?" "Social work," she said, a hint of shyness in her voice. "I've been thinking a lot about how lucky we are, how much support we have. I want to help other parents, other families, who might not have the same resources." Alexander pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You're going to be amazing at it," he said with conviction. "Whatever you need to make it happen, just say the word." As they sat there, making plans for the future with their daughter sleeping peacefully beside them, Olivia felt a profound sense of contentment wash over her. Their journey hadn't been conventional or easy, but it had led them here, to a life filled with love, purpose, and endless possibility. Later that evening, as they prepared dinner together, Alexander chopping vegetables while Olivia kept an eye on Sophia in her high chair, the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Alexander said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. A moment later, Olivia heard the sound of raised voices. Frowning, she picked up Sophia and made her way to the front door. She found Alexander engaged in a heated discussion with a man she didn't recognize. The stranger held a professional-looking camera, and Olivia's heart sank as she realized he must be a paparazzo. "I told you, we're not interested in any photos or interviews," Alexander was saying, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "Please leave our property immediately." The photographer's eyes lit up when he saw Olivia and Sophia. He raised his camera, but Alexander stepped in front of them protectively. "That's enough," Alexander said firmly. "I'm calling the police." As Alexander reached for his phone, the photographer's shoulders slumped. "Look, I'm sorry," he said, lowering his camera. "I've got a family to feed too, you know. This job, it's not always pleasant, but it pays the bills." Something in the man's defeated tone struck a chord with Olivia. She placed a hand on Alexander's arm, silently asking him to wait. "What's your name?" she asked the photographer. He looked surprised at the question. David? David Reeves?" Olivia nodded, an idea forming in her mind. "David, I understand you're just trying to do your job, but our family isn't a story or a paycheck. We're real people, trying to live our lives and raise our daughter in peace." David had the grace to look ashamed. "I know. I'm sorry. I really am. Alexander, catching on to Olivia's approach, added, We're not trying to hide. We're just asking for respect and privacy. Olivia took a deep breath, making a decision. How about this? We'll give you one photo, a family portrait. In exchange, you agree to leave us alone and encourage your colleagues to do the same. Deal. David's eyes widened in surprise. Really? Yes, absolutely. Thank you. What followed was a surreal impromptu photo shoot on their front porch. As David snapped a few shots of them, Alexander with his arm around Olivia, Sophia giggling in her mother's arms, Olivia felt a sense of control she hadn't expected. After David left, profusely thanking them and promising to spread the word about leaving the family in peace, Alexander turned to Olivia with a mix of admiration and concern. That was unexpected, he said. Are you sure about this? Olivia nodded, bouncing Sophia gently in her arms. I think so. Maybe if we control the narrative a bit, give them something, they'll be less inclined to intrude. And who knows? Maybe seeing us as a real family will change some minds. Alexander pulled her close, careful not to squish Sophia between them. You never cease to amaze me, he murmured. I love you, Olivia Mason. And I love you, Alexander Prescott, she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him softly. As they made their way back inside, Sophia babbling happily between them, Olivia felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were forging their own path, creating a life that balanced privacy and openness, tradition and modernity. It wouldn't always be easy, but with love, understanding, and a willingness to adapt, they could face anything together. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. And as Olivia gazed at her little family, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them head-on, together. The sound of tiny feet pattering down the hallway brought a smile to Olivia's face as she stood at the kitchen counter, poring over her textbooks. A moment later, 3-year-old Sophia burst into the room, her dark curls bouncing and her blue eyes, so like her father's, sparkling with excitement. Mommy, Mommy, look what I drawed, Sophia exclaimed, waving a colorful piece of paper. Olivia knelt down, accepting the drawing with exaggerated reverence. Wow, sweetie, this is beautiful. Is this our family? Sophia nodded enthusiastically, pointing to each stick figure. That's you, and that's Daddy, and that's me, and that's... She trailed off, her little brow furrowing in concentration. Olivia felt her heart skip a beat, knowing what was coming next. And that's the new baby in your tummy, Sophia finished triumphantly. Olivia pulled her daughter into a tight hug, blinking back tears. At 5 months pregnant, she was still getting used to the idea of expanding their family. Sophia's easy acceptance and excitement were a balm to her occasionally frazzled nerves. That's right, sweet pea, Olivia said, her voice thick with emotion. That's your little brother or sister. As if on cue, Alexander walked into the kitchen, his tie loosened and jacket slung over one arm, his face lit up at the sight of his girls huddled together on the floor. What's this? A secret meeting I wasn't invited to, he teased, dropping his briefcase and joining them on the floor. Sophia giggled, launching herself into her father's arms. Daddy, I drawed our family. As Alexander admired the artwork, lavishing praise on their budding artist, Olivia felt a wave of contentment wash over her. The past 3 years had been a whirlwind of changes and challenges, but moments like these made it all worthwhile. Later that evening, after Sophia had been tucked into bed with stories and songs, Olivia found Alexander in his home office, frowning at his computer screen. "A penny for your thoughts?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. Alexander looked up, his expression softening as he took in the sight of her. "Just some issues with the New York office," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The board is pushing for me to spend more time there." Olivia felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. They'd had this conversation before, and it never got easier. "Oh, what did you tell them?" Alexander stood, crossing the room to pull her into his arms. "The same thing I always tell them. My family is here, and this is where I need to be." Olivia melted into his embrace, but she couldn't shake the nagging worry. Alex, are you sure? I don't want you to sacrifice your career for us. He pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. Liv, you and the kids are my career. Everything else is just details. Besides, he added with a grin, the Hudson Valley branch is doing better than anyone expected. Turns out there's a lot of untapped talent in small-town America. Olivia smiled, remembering the pride on Alexander's face when he'd hired Joe, her old boss from the diner, as the head of the cafeteria in the new office building. It was just one of the many ways Alexander had integrated himself into the community, winning over even the most skeptical locals. Well, Mr. Big Shot CEO, Olivia teased, how about you take a break from world domination and help your very pregnant wife with her homework? Alexander's eyes lit up with interest. Social work theory or child psychology today? As they settled on the couch, textbooks spread around them. Olivia marveled at how seamlessly their lives had intertwined. Alexander had thrown himself into supporting her education with the same passion he brought to his business dealings, often serving as a sounding board for her ideas and essays. Their quiet study session was interrupted by a soft cry from the baby monitor. They shared a knowing look. Sophia's nightmares had been more frequent lately, likely triggered by the impending arrival of her sibling. I've got her, Alexander said, pressing a kiss to Olivia's forehead before heading upstairs. Olivia listened as Alexander's soothing voice came through the monitor, calming their daughter with practiced ease. She rested a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. You're going to have the best daddy in the world, little one, she murmured. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day. Olivia was in the middle of helping Sophia with her shoes when her phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart sank as she read the headline. Prescott Air living small-town life. Charming family man or neglectful CEO. With a sigh, she opened the article, skimming through the mix of glowing praise for Alexander's commitment to his family and thinly veiled criticisms of his decision to run the company from a small-town branch. Everything okay? Alexander asked, coming down the stairs with Sophia's backpack in hand. Olivia hesitated, then handed him the phone. She watched as his expression darkened, his jaw clenching as he read. It's nothing we haven't heard before, she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. Alexander nodded, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. I know. It's just frustrating. No matter what we do, they always find something to criticize. Sophia, oblivious to the adults in concern, tugged on her father's pant leg. Daddy, are we going to the park today? You promised. Just like that, the cloud lifted from Alexander's face. He scooped Sophia up, peppering her face with kisses until she shrieked with laughter. You bet we are, princess. Nothing's going to stop our daddy-daughter date. As they headed out the door, Alexander paused to give Olivia a lingering kiss. I love you, he murmured against her lips. Both of you, he added, placing a gentle hand on her belly. We love you too, Olivia replied, her heart full. Now go have fun, and try not to worry about the article. But as she watched them drive away, Olivia couldn't shake her own concerns. She knew how much Alexander had sacrificed to build this life with her, how hard he worked to balance his responsibilities as a CEO with his role as a husband and father. The constant scrutiny and criticism must be taking a toll, even if he rarely showed it. Determined to lift her own spirits, Olivia decided to take a walk into town. As she strolled down Main Street, nodding and smiling at familiar faces, she found herself in front of Joe's diner. On impulse, she pushed open the door, the familiar bell chiming above her head. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Maggie's voice rang out from behind the counter. If it isn't our favorite social worker to be, Olivia laughed, settling onto a stool at the counter. Part-time social worker to be, she corrected. Full-time mom and professional waddler. As Maggie poured her a cup of decaf coffee, don't tell Joe, but I keep a special stash just for you. Olivia felt some of the tension from earlier begin to melt away. This was her world. These people who had known her long before she became Mrs. Prescott in the society pages. So, spill, Maggie said, leaning on the counter. What's got you looking all pensive on this beautiful day? Olivia sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Just, The usual. Another article about Alex, questioning his commitment to the company because he chooses to live here with us. Maggie rolled her eyes. Those city folks just don't get it, do they? They should see the way that man looks at you and Sophia. Or the way he's revitalized half the businesses in town with that new office of his. As if to prove her point, the door chimed again, and in walked Mr. Thompson, the high school principal. He beamed when he saw Olivia. "Mrs. Prescott, just the person I wanted to see. I was hoping to catch Alexander at the office, but maybe you can pass along a message." Olivia nodded, curious. "Of course. What is it?" Mr. Thompson's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Defour. We've finalized the plans for that STEM program Alexander was helping us develop. Thanks to his company's donation and expertise, we'll be able to offer cutting-edge technology classes starting next fall. It's going to change lives, Mrs. Prescott. Our kids will have opportunities they never dreamed of." As Mr. Thompson continued to extol the virtues of the program and Alexander's contributions, Olivia felt a swell of pride. This was the man she had fallen in love with. Not just the charming stranger from the diner or the powerful CEO, but a man deeply committed to making a difference in the world around him. By the time she left the diner, Olivia's step was lighter, her resolve strengthened. Let the newspapers say what they would, she knew the truth of their life, the depth of Alexander's commitment to both his family and his wider community. That evening, as they sat on the porch swing watching Sophia chase fireflies in the yard, Olivia turned to Alexander with a determined look in her eye. "I think we should do it," she said. Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Do what, love?" "The interview. The one that magazine has been pushing for, a day in the life of the Prescott family kind of thing." Alexander looked surprised. "Are you sure? I thought we agreed to keep our private life private." Olivia nodded, taking his hand in hers. "I know, and we still will, for the most part. But maybe it's time to show the world a little bit of the real us. Not the polished society couple or the small-town curiosity, but just us. A family trying to balance work and life and community, just like anyone else." Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "You know what? I think you're right. Let's do it." As Sophia ran back to them, her hands cupped around a glowing firefly, Olivia felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, a new baby, the constant balancing act of their lives, the ever-present public interest, they would face them together, with honesty and grace. The future was bright, full of possibility, and as the sun set on another day in their small town, Olivia knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, building a life of love, purpose, and endless adventure, one day at a time.